So once again, I mentioned Mark Collard is here all the way from Australia, where I believe it is just turning 7 o'clock in the morning tomorrow. Thanks a lot for being here, Mark. He's, if you don't know, the founder of Playmeo, world-renowned author, speaker, facilitator, wrote this book, Serious Fun, which I've had a chance to read. A great resource for how to plan and deliver excellent programs. So we're excited to learn a little bit from you today, Mark. And I don't want to take up any more time. I'll go ahead and pass it on over to you.
Thank you very much, Dan. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My guess is that I will have covered all of the options there. It is 7 o'clock in the morning, Thursday, here in Melbourne, Australia, and I've been excited about this since Dan and I started thinking about the possibilities of being able to contribute to the AEE community. I've often regarded the AEE community as my kind of people because I do view my work as an experiential trainer, principally, although I happen to also be an author and I do many other things. But before I move on, the first thing I want to do, and I do this with all the work that I share in writing, also with the work that I do as a trainer, is to thank you. That is not to say thank you just for having turned up. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day, for many of you at the end of your day, to be a part of this webinar, but importantly, for the work that you're doing. I know AEE is going through their process of looking at their core mission and values at the moment. And one of those things that still strikes at the heart of what we do as experiential educators is that this belief that it is a very powerful and rewarding way to learn. And so I want to be able to thank you on behalf of all the different groups that you're working with and making an impact on their life. I've taken this photograph directly from the AEE website. Hopefully permission is okay with all of that. But it just reminds us and it puts me in the focus to understand that each time I stand in front of a group, today standing in front of my computer terminal, beamed around the world, that this is my focus. It's making a difference. And we've given the label to this webinar, as I have with my latest book, about wanting to create remarkably fun programs that make a difference. And there's two things about this webinar I really want to be able to emphasize and hopefully inspire and equip you with today. First of all is that we're looking to make a difference. That this is not just about telling you how to play games or run adventure programs or how to run a good debrief. All of those things are valuable, but it's more about making a difference. And I'm going to share something with you that for many people are still quite challenged by when I talk about how do we articulate the difference we're going to make, let's say, to the young people that we see on the screen right now. How do we actually make a difference? That is, they are in some way have grown, developed, they've learned something more than when they first started with you that morning, that afternoon, that evening, the beginning of the camp, whatever that is. So that's the first thing, wanting to make a difference. And I want to certainly aim for that in this next hour that we spend together. The next part is I deliberately are using the word remarkable. It's about me creating remarkably fun programs. Yet, unashamedly, wanting to make it fun, but importantly, I want it to be remarkable. And I'm not using the word remarkable in exchange for amazing or outstanding or great. I'm using it for the true sense of the word. That is the ability to remark. We all know that when we've done great work and we've made a difference, that those young people or those adults that we've worked with can't wait to tell somebody else. That is the ability to remark. And when we're running programs that give people the opportunity to remark like that, then I know that I'm doing good work. I'm making a difference in my world. So that's my focus for today. And if that's a reason for why you get up in the morning to do your work about making a difference and hopefully being able to share that with others so that it makes a big impact, then we're in the right spot. And I wish to share with you some real useful nuggets that I've learned over the many years that I've been practicing these skills. Let me stop for a moment. I'm actually kind of lying. I'm saying I'm focusing on the group that we're looking at right now, but I'm actually focused on this little guy here. His name is Devon and he is my son. Next month he turns 5. This picture is probably just on 12 months old. Everything about what I'm doing is focused on this little guy here because I know that while I'll never be able to get to every kid in the world, my passion is for making a difference to young people. And to think that I can be working with people and sharing with others around the world, whether it's when I turn up or through a book or when I attend a conference or a training around the world, a webinar, then I'm able to actually make a difference to other young people around the world. So my focus is about creating remarkably fun programs. It's about making a difference, but I'm always focused on my family and in particular, my little boy. Which brings me to who I am. I have a number of facets to me, like all of us. I'm a dad, I'm a husband, I'm an Australian, although I do spend a lot of time in planes around the world. I'm also a volunteer with many community groups, particularly with community theatre, some environmental groups as well. Some interesting little tidbits just to give you a flavour for who I am as a person. Talking about travelling, I've estimated I've spent about 5 months of my life sitting inside a steel tube, hurtling through the air at 800 kilometres an hour in a plane, so to speak, crisscrossing the world in all of my travels. So a significant part of my life has been sitting in planes. I've found many four-leaf clovers. In fact, I think I've found 8 now in my life. I've walked on a bed of nails. I've camped on the lawns of Australia's Parliament House. It's like your Capitol Hill. For 4 days as part of a logging protest. Didn't get arrested, that was good news. And finally, I've been hit by lightning twice. And in fact, it's very close to where Dan is. It was in a little place called Hendersonville, where I was working for a summer camp there for many, many years. So that's a little bit about who I am. I'm interested to know who you are now. Dan has provided the opportunity for a little pop-up just to give me a sense. It's more me wanting to play with the technology, but also get a sense, am I working with people who are all teachers, or are you all experiential educators? And in particular, what's the age of the groups that you're working with? So if you wouldn't mind taking a moment just to do a quick poll, and let's see what we get pull up. This is all very new to me as well, so I'm interested to see what your answers will be. So a strong representation of people who would regard themselves generally as an outdoor or experiential educator, about 3/4 of you. And then we've also got a smattering of teachers, lecturers, and some others. I'm sorry we couldn't find the opportunity to actually help you specify what that is. So great, my kind of people, fantastic. And just over half of you are working with adults, about 45% of you are working with young people. So that gives me a sense of who I'm now talking to, which is terrific. So just very, very, very quickly to remind you folks how it is that I come to be sitting before you, because this is indeed an honour to sit before my peers and want to share with you. And it is shared. There's nothing about what I'm sharing with you that is the truth. That is my first warning. This is not the truth. This is something I've made up that I plan to share with you. But this is how I've managed to develop this. I've certainly been working in this field for about 28 years, principally in Australia, but especially the last 10 years, increasingly internationally. I've written 4 books. Most of them are activity books. I'm in the middle of my 5th at the moment, which is being designed deliberately to be written in Mandarin. It has to be translated. I don't speak any Chinese languages, and it'll be a rewrite and containing some of the information I'll be sharing with you today. I am the founder of Playmio.com, which most people know as just a massive online database of group activities. I'm an international member of AEE, and that's broadening, which is just so pleasing to be a part of a group that understands it is part of a global community. I'm a board member of Outdoors Victoria, which is the peak body representing all other peak bodies that do stuff in the outdoors, including camping and experiential education. And in the County Court of Victoria, from a legal perspective, I'm an expert witness. On many occasions in my career, I've been called to stand before a jury and the defence and prosecution to provide an opinion on an adventure program as to whether it was safe or not. So although most of the things that I do tend to be really passive, people's feet aren't even leaving the ground, that does give you a little bit of background as to who it is that I am and why I come to be speaking before you now. Here's our focus. There's 3 things which were reflected in the promotion, and you'll note that there's going to be quite a little bit more than this, but in particular, I'm really passionate about helping people understand that there is a philosophical imperative behind making connections with before your content. It is a term that's bandied around quite a bit now, connection before content. And so I want to help you understand philosophically as well as scientifically why that's really important in the world of making a difference. I'm going to quickly share with you my 4 steps. Again, I've made this up, but I found it applies so readily and so simply to pretty much every program I run that helps me create those fun programs. And one piece that I know from all the keynotes and other presentations I make that people get a lot of value from is I'm going to focus particularly on, what are the key ingredients that helps an experience effectively break the ice. Notice I didn't say how to run a good icebreaker, because unfortunately, in my experience, they're not often run very, very well. And so I'm going to share with you what I have learned that in almost all cases allows that experience to effectively break the ice. So in the course of this next 40 to 45 minutes before we get to questions, that's what I'm looking to tick off. What's possible? It's effectively the question I ask every time someone asks me, could you come in and do a training? It was part of the conversation I had in my mind when Dan invited me to be a part of this webinar. I'm going, what is possible? I stand before every group and I ask that question, what is possible? Now, the quick answer is that I know what is possible is a lot greater, a lot higher, whatever dimension you want to give it, if I spend the time and invest the energy to prepare, if I prep my group. Nothing's impossible without preparation, although you can just do anything, but you may not be very proud of it. But with preparation, success is more likely to happen. To have not prepared in the ways that I plan to share with you is akin to simply throwing a group together in a room and expecting them to get along. We all know that that doesn't work. It might work for a few minutes, maybe a few hours, maybe even a couple of days in a long-term program. But over the term of the life of that group, it's not going to be a recipe for success. But I start always with that question, what is possible? And effectively, for every group I work with, and I think of a group I worked with just literally 10 hours ago, late last night, a group of camp leaders. I stand in front of them, there's about 20 of them, and I go, what is possible for these folks? I want to help them understand and get them inspired about looking at their programs to help them not only take fun more seriously, but also make a difference to all the camp leaders that they're working with. So that's the first thing. I want to understand that I want to give them as much as possible, aiming for that as I can. There's several universal truths that I think for me has been the bedrock for helping me answer this question about the preparation I need to give a group to allow them to achieve what is possible, the ultimate, the peak, so to speak, for them. But before I get to this first truth, and I appreciate it's on the screen now, but I want to give a little bit of background as to how did I even come up with this stuff? As I said, I've only just made this up, so to speak. But in 1989, I started my internship with Project Adventure, and I worked alongside my mentors, and the names of people like Carl Ronke, some of the people I'm sure you're familiar with, and many, many other wonderful facilitators. And pretty much, to be fair with you, the first 5 years of my career was trying to emulate them, trying to emulate the experts. And by that 5 years, I started to understand that if I just followed a certain sequence of events, I managed to get success. And yet I knew that when I didn't follow those steps, I didn't get quite as the same possibility, the same levels of success as I had hoped. And I can recall vividly many occasions talking with these very experienced expert facilitators and practitioners saying, how did you know to do that? How did you know to do that? How did you understand this? And if I could boil their answers down to one word, they would come up with intuition. It's like intuition. I don't know. I kind of just know it. It was sourced from all of their body of experience and knowledge. The hard part about that, and I can understand why they answered that, was that when I stood before a group and they would ask me the same questions, it wasn't a useful question. It wasn't empowering to say, oh, I don't know. I kind of just knew. I just knew to do this. 3 years ago, when I wrote Serious Fun, I got some professional coaching to help me write that book. I had a lot to share and I did a big brain dump. And they had said a couple of things to me. And one of the most powerful things was, why don't you, from the very start of a program, tell me everything that you do, every thought that you have. So I started, it took a long time. I got to a certain point where I rushed over a particular piece and I used the word intuition. He said, stop right there, go back. Could you explain that again? I used the word intuition again. And he said, no, okay, first of all, there is no such thing as intuition. Now, perhaps you're even thinking, a little voice in your mind just said, hang on, that doesn't sound right. There is a thing called intuition. You're right, it does exist. What he's saying is that we use it as an excuse for covering up that it's just unexplored process. Intuition is just unexplored process. It was like a locomotive hitting me in like front on. Bam! I was then able to like unlock what my intuition was. There were a series of steps, and the bedrock of those steps are these three universal truths. Now, I didn't have them in these particular words those years ago, but each time I retell this, I refine it a little bit more, and these three truths are now represented best in the slides I have to share with you now. This first universal truth is, and you can read it off the screen, but I want to introduce, and I put into red, some key elements here. That the most successful programs, those which intentionally develop healthy and trusty relationships, because they outperform all other programs. Now, it's using the word programs not because it's just focused on camps or schools or corporate training rooms or the outdoors. It's effectively any program that is responsible for the well-being of a group. Now, this comes directly from P21. You may be familiar with it, the Partnership for 21st Century Learning. And they captured it in a way that just, like, yes, that is what I had believed. That has been the bedrock of my steps for how I've created remarkably fun programs. So the first piece here I want to highlight in particular is the intention. It's the intentionality right from the start. And that goes directly to my understanding of this term we now coin, the connection before content. If I take the time, the energy, sometimes the money to actually invest in connecting my group, building their relationships before the content, then it's going to create a high level of possibility for my content as a result. And it's because of this. It's because it was intentional that I actually bothered to develop trusting and healthy relationships. It improves the level of participation. It improves the level of intimacy and security and the strength of the relationships. And if you're looking at schools, it increases their academic performance. In some ways, this is like the priest talking to the choir here. You understand this message, but perhaps for me, it hasn't been as clear as I've now stated it. Is that for me, this is a bedrock. I understand when I think in front of a group, what is possible for them is that I know what is possible for them is only as a result of my intentionality of building trusting and healthy relationships right from the start. I could spend a lot of time on all of these truths and give you lots more examples, but with the limited time, I want to keep powering through, and perhaps if you have some questions, please note them, and I'll be absolutely happy to answer them, whether it's inside this webinar or after it. You'll have plenty of opportunities to contact me after that. So the first truth, intentionally develop trusting and healthy relationships. Number two, again, this was a bit like a locomotive. It is impossible to change how people think or what they do without first changing how they feel. Let me say that again. It's impossible to change how people think or what they do without first changing how they feel. Everything about what we do and behave and think has come from a feeling. We are a motive or a bag of emotions, effectively, as human beings. And for me, again, when I consider what is possible for my group, I have to appreciate that the most powerful way I have to influence them in terms of their thinking and their behaviors is to consider how they're feeling. From the time they've walked through the door to every moment as I sequence my program, I am considering that question: what is possible and what are they feeling? And it's not just about, are they happy, are they sad, but where are they coming from? What is necessary right now to be able to influence? I don't necessarily mean change, because only they can change their thinking. Only they can change their behaviors. You're very familiar with that understanding. But I have an opportunity to influence it. And so I can only do that if I can understand how they're feeling. Here's a quick example. When you are eating lunch because you felt hungry, it wasn't because you thought about hunger. It was because there was something in your body that sent a message that made you feel hunger, which as a result, they made you think, maybe it's time to eat. And then, of course, that then influences your actions and your thoughts, and you go off and do something to actually change that situation. Or what's another example? Perhaps you're part of a group discussion and you contribute an idea, and then someone else contributes an idea that disagrees with yours. Now, you will immediately feel like you need to defend yourself, and you will act and behave in a certain way, but it comes from the root of that feeling to begin with, is that you felt vulnerable, you felt exposed, and you felt in all those other things about perhaps even being attacked. That then, of course, influenced your thoughts about how you're going to respond, and then, of course, that then influenced your actions. So the second universal truth, the bedrock of me being able to attain what is possible for my groups, is to appreciate this. I can't influence them until I first acknowledge how they're feeling. And number three, we are comfort-seeking machines. That's just a term I've made up. I don't think it's a scientific term, but we are comfort-seeking machines. This comes directly from the work of the zones of proximal development. It's probably a concept that you're familiar with or may know better as comfort zones. We're comfort-seeking machines. Everything about what we do as a species, as a human being, is by default from a level of safety. Yet, we know as experiential educators, as teachers, as university lecturers and so forth, we know that if we only ever permit our group to remain within their comfort zone, no growth, no learning, no development is ever going to happen. So for those who are not familiar, very, very quickly, and there's a lot that can be shared about this space here, but without using all the scientific terms, but here's a graphical interface that many of you will be familiar with. There's this comfort zone, the stretch zone, and the panic zone. A lot of people, though, have a limited understanding of what this means, and it does refer back to my third universal truth. We often think of it in terms of how we're just feeling. I know I've just come out of the second universal truth and talked about how feelings are important, but the actual zones of proximal development theory, the educational theory of how humans develop their skills, relates more to success and how success is attained than it does necessarily to how you feel. For example, everything in your comfort zone relates to the things that you can do without assistance, leadership, or guidance. Everything you can do without those things, that is, you can do on your own and achieve success on your own, fits within your comfort zone. So, for example, I have a very strong command of the English language, although clearly with an Australian accent. That all fits within my comfort zone. 8 years ago, my wife and I moved to Italy. We lived in Florence for 3 months. We took an Italian language class. None of that language class was within my comfort zone. I needed guidance with a phrase book. I needed a language teacher. I needed lots of other assistance because I was now in my stretch zone. In order to achieve success, I needed leadership, guidance, tuition, assistance in order to be successful. So that is the distinction between a comfort zone and a stretch zone. Not so much about how you're feeling, that is a result of the level of success that you can achieve on your own. In the stretch zone, with help, you can be successful. Clearly, there's all sorts of degrees of assistance and success that you can achieve. And then finally, you reach a point where no matter how much tuition, guidance, or leadership that you get, you're now in the panic zone. That it's impossible or nigh impossible. You don't want to return to this space in order to be successful at that again. And so that's the space we don't want to put people. However, we need to accept that if they're only ever in their comfort zone, they're not going to grow either, because for all the educational theory that we could discuss, it's only in those spaces where we stretch ourselves. And the more often we step into the stretch zone, the bigger our comfort zone gets. So at the end of 3 months, my wife and I were able to have simple conversations in Italian with an Italian person who would respond to us in Italian, rather than in the very beginning, they had to respond in English because our Italian wasn't very, very good. So our comfort zone grew a little bit in that sense. So to repeat, we are comfort-seeking machines. If I have to accept that what is possible for my group, I need to acknowledge that they start from being a comfort-seeking machine. But, and this is the issue that we have, our challenge is a big question which I have for you. So let's do a quick recap. Successful programs intentionally develop healthy and trusting relationships. You can only influence people first if you change how they feel. And then finally, we are comfort-seeking machines. Here's our challenge. Now, it is embodied in this first challenge. before I can then dive into the work that I have discovered for myself. Here's the challenge. It's like, well, if as human beings, we are by default most comfortable in our comfort zone, but we know that as experiential educators and teachers and lecturers, they need to be in their stretch zone. How do we get them to try new things, learn leadership skills, value teamwork, and so on, when their natural inclination is to seek comfort? That's tough. Or put it another way, how do we, I'm going to give us some responsibility here, how do we create an atmosphere in which people can choose to grow? Two very important words there. Not only the choice, they get to choose this. How do we create an environment in which they can choose to grow? And importantly, the other word is can. I didn't put it in red, but I should have. Is that they can. I know a lot of people use the program program philosophy called Challenge by Choice. Yet when you look at their language and you look at their program structure, it's very difficult to exercise choice because of the way it has been set up. And so it's important that we create an atmosphere in which people can choose to grow. And so I often view Challenge by Choice as a responsibility I have to create an environment in which people make appropriate choices consistent with the goals of my program. So that's our challenge. How do we create this? And I have just one quick answer. Fun. It's as simple and succinct as I can make it. When I think of people inside their comfort zone, not willing to step into the stretch zone where I need them to be to develop their skills or whatever it is that we're working on, the number one most potent weapon I have at my disposal, you have at your disposal, is to make it fun. Why? Other than the obvious benefits of it's just enjoyable, but here are the other things that are going on for you. That it's disarming. It actually disarms people. They don't realize they've stepped outside their comfort zone and doing things that at first glance they would never have done at the beginning of their program because you made it fun. Fun is also contagious. So yeah, I can think of countless programs where, you've got those first few people, maybe at the back of the group who are not convinced that this just looks like a lot of fun and, it's childish and da. Yet, over time, as more and more energy builds and it becomes more and more fun for everybody, it becomes contagious. And then it just wraps up everyone in the momentum to be able to move them forward, in particular, propel them forward into a space that initially they didn't feel comfortable in actually being a part of. And fun, as I say, has been its own reward as well. But as I also say, and as you'll be familiar, if you happen to have children or have read any Dr. Seuss books, it's fun to have fun, but you have to know how. It's not my quote, it comes directly from one of the books in Cat in the Hat. It's now time to share with you the difference model. So appreciate the bedrock of how I've come to this space, an understanding of those three universal truths, and now understanding that I'm looking at what is possible for my group. This next slide is going to give you all 4 steps, and then I'm going to go through them in a little bit more detail, but with some of them more detail than others. So the difference model. It's a silly little name. In fact, for the longest time, you can tell just from the 4 steps. It used to be called the 4P model, not half as sexy as calling it the difference model. So that's what I've stuck with, because it is about creating a difference. In fact, it starts with difference and ends with difference. Let me just touch on the essence of each of the 4 steps. None of this is rocket science. And as I remind you, this is not the truth. I've made it up. This is what I have found that has fit the 28 years of experience. And each time I stand in front of a group, I tweak it just a little bit more. But today, the first step is the plan. I know you're already planning, but there's something embedded in here that is perhaps a little bit different to what you're already doing. But it is about articulating the difference you want to make to your group. How do you want to feel? How do you want them to feel? Effectively, what do you want them to become? We are human beings, B-E, beings, not human doings. So I'm always thinking in terms of what's possible for my group, in terms of what do I want them to be? What do I want them to become? That is the first step. Again, I'll come in more detail with this, giving you the overview. When the group actually turns up, so step 1 is all before the group's arrived. Step 2 is the prime. It's setting the tone, it's creating an environment, and it fosters lots of learning and interaction. Everything about this step, whether it's 5 minutes or 5 days or 5 months, sits within the comfort zone for a very powerful reason, and I'll come to that. The next step, this is really where your program lies. The bulk of the time and energy and investment sits in the pumping stage. This is when you work hard. By virtue of the name, to pump means to actually exert effort. This is when your role really comes to the fore because they need you. They don't know it. They won't even tell you that they need help. But when you've moved them outside their comfort zone into their stretch zone, you're there to support them and to help them grow and develop and learn in that space. Again, the proviso here is that you're working in an educational setting. If all you do is provide recreational programs, this is still useful because you can still benefit from having developed some of the social emotional skills in this step of pump. But really, this is speaking to educators. It's about, yep, let's take on and use this wonderful methodology of experiential learning and invite our groups to grow at the same time as delivering the content which is critical to our groups. And peak, call it a step, but it's really the result. It's what's left. It's the answer to the question, what is possible? And ideally, every time I stand in front of a group, partly today, even with this webinar, is to not only help you feel engaged, but also empowered, valued, and maybe this is a difficult one, but typically if they're standing up and turning, they actually turn up to be meaningfully connected to each other. Not just, hey, I've got your business card, but to be meaningfully connected to other people. That's my peak for every group that I work with. Let's get into the detail now because this is where I think the more value can be found. As I said, this is about the first step. It's articulating the difference you want to make in your program. That's not the same as a goal. I'm going to share the difference about that in a moment. It may have sounded the same, but they are very, very different beasts. I want to identify how my group's going to feel at the end so I can appreciate where they're at when they first start, and I can feel what I want them to be feeling and become at the end. And I'm always asking at the very beginning, before I've even seen my group, what is possible? Here are the several steps. And again, I go into great detail in the book Serious Fun. By the way, you can also download for free, but I'll give you more details about that later on. This first step is made up of 3 parts. The first part, if you're like me, you get your easy homework done first. Cross off the easy things off your to-do list. It's asking the what, when, who, and where of your program. So what are you running? It's a team building program. When? Tomorrow. Who? For 30 people. Where? At a particular venue. That's the easy stuff. That's part of your plan. Don't want to spend too much time on that. The apparent goal. Now, I'm being quite deliberate in my language here. This is the goal. This is probably where most programs stop. And I would argue having a goal is better than not having a goal. But I would argue you can do more. There is actually some really powerful benefits to going one step further. But identifying that there is an apparent goal. It's effectively answering the question, why are you running the program? You already have a good sense of that. You've got a reason. There are several bullet points that you're wanting to do. We had several bullet points for this webinar. Share a philosophical framework, describe to you the 4 steps of my difference model, and so on and so on. They are effectively the goals of the webinar. But we all know, and we have seen other people, maybe even our own colleagues, for yourself as well, to be truthful, is that we understand that we may have achieved our goal. I'll get to the end of this hour of webinar and gone, yep, ticked all of those boxes. But here's the kicker. Did I make a difference? Did I make a difference? That's the game I'm playing. And so this third step is critical. It asks a different level of a why. It goes at a deeper level. It's what do I want my group to become? And I like to express it in terms of look, sound, and feel. Now at this stage you're going, oh, didn't we just do that? Isn't that the same as a goal? Let me try and distinguish them a little bit further. For example, with the goal, everything about that goal was related to me. It was my goal. This is what I had set up to create for this webinar, to share the philosophical framework, to describe the 3 steps and describe the key ingredients of an icebreaker. I can get to all of that and tick all those boxes, but did I make a difference? The key for me is articulating the difference. And I see it as inspiring you and equipping you and empowering you to do this for yourself. That is effectively the difference that I have articulated for this webinar in the things that I have to share, that I have inspired you because you go, wow, that sounds like some stuff I haven't tried before. I'd like to give it a go. I'm also going to give you some tools. I'm in the process of doing that now, where you feel like as an empowered person, you can do this for yourself. So my goals were those bullet points, but the difference I was looking to make was expressed in feelings. Remember, the universal truth cannot change how a person thinks of what they do until you first change how they feel. That's why inspiration is the first piece, is that I want to inspire you to think, wow, okay, this is a new way of looking at something I've known for a long time. I want to equip you with a few tools as well, simple things, not rocket science, so that you can do it for yourself, to be empowered. And so that's a look, sound, and feel. That's the difference. So you've got a goal. Great. Better to have a goal than not have one. I'm going to challenge you. Consider, and this is not anything I need any interaction for right now, but consider, what difference are you looking to make? So I think of the group I worked with just yesterday, last night, 10 hours ago. They had come out of 3 hours of sitting on their butts, listening to people talk at them. And then I come in and I invite them to push all the chairs off to the side. So immediately, even though they're camp leaders, they're kind of a bit offside because they were very comfortable sitting in that space of, oh, I'll just sit here and I'll be a bucket for information. But that wasn't enough. So they were somewhat reticent, a little bit suspect about, oh no, here we go. I've seen these games before. We use them in our camps already. I'm probably not going to learn anything new. That's the space they were starting from. At the end of the 90 minutes, these folks hung around for another 10 or 15 minutes wanting to chat, talk, continue to integrate and strengthen their relationships, and were clearly very inspired. It's like, wow, I've seen this activity before, but not done that way. Or that was a whole lot of new activities, can't wait to try it. So my challenge to you at this point, at the first step of the difference model, is what difference are you trying to make? And express it in feelings, emotions. And if you can, help understand what it's going to look like, sound like, and feel like. That's your first step. Your group's now finally turned up. It's the prime stage. Everything about this step sits within the comfort zone. So for the most part, you're going to provide many, many experiences and present many experiences, which for the most part, we all know, a group is a body of lots of different individual feelings and goals and so forth. But for the most part, the group can be successful. Now, it depends on what your definition of success is. Is it about energy? Is it about the level of trust? Is it about how much they interact and participate? Whatever that might be. But at this first level, it's about inviting them to interact, to do lots of sharing, opportunities for strengthening relationships, and it all fits within the comfort zone. Now, for many people, they think, oh, yeah, this is when we do our icebreakers. And that's true. We'd use that as a term used to describe many of the experiences in this space. But let me just go one more step. So the prime step, it's not even related to your program necessarily. It could actually be related to it in some ways, but it could be completely separate. I have PE teachers here in Melbourne, Australia, I've done a lot of training with, who have permission from their school principals to spend the first few weeks of the beginning of their term at the start of the year doing absolutely no content, no PE whatsoever. All they do is focus on developing relationships. That's all they're doing. I have one PE teacher who has permission to do this for 5 weeks. So powerful has this been on the school culture and the results this particular PE teacher gets from the rest of his school year with these kids, that this has been now starting to spread throughout the rest of the school. And it's because they acknowledge that inviting people to build relationships just pays a bigger dividends for what's possible for their content. And there's a structure to it. I call it the unofficial start. This is how it begins. It's before anyone has turned up, or perhaps only a few people have turned up early. So yesterday, I turn up while people are having an afternoon tea. And so a few people are milling around, they've already done their afternoon tea. I bring out some activities to engage them. Before too long, a few more people arrive. Before we know it, people have worked out that something's going on. They're now engaged. I found this was a very useful strategy to have an unofficial start to get people there on time. I lectured at a university in adventure leadership for 7 years. So for 14 semesters, I would start at 2 o'clock for my class, finish at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And if the room was available, I'd start about 10 or 15 minutes early. I'd have stuff ready to do. Sometimes little games, there might be a video, there'd be puzzles on the floor that they can work with. And ordinarily, as university students do, they spend the first couple of weeks just turning up whenever they want, because they know every other lecturer allows them to turn up late. Why start until everyone's here? I'm going, that's lost productivity. Let's spend the time productively rather than just looking at the wall and waiting for people to arrive. And here's the interesting thing that happened. It happened 14 out of 14 times. By about the third or fourth week of a 14-week semester, I never had a late student, because something happened in that space that communicated without me having to say it to these students who did turn up late, that they missed out on something. It's FOMO, the fear of missing out, is that they missed out on something and they wanted to be a part of it. And so that was the internal motivation to get them there on time. Remember, you cannot change how a person thinks or what they do until you first change how they feel. They felt left out. That had a powerful motivator for them to want to turn up earlier. So much more I could share in that space, but that's the first step of this priming stage, the unofficial start. Then there's the official start. Hi, my name's Mark, move on. Then I start with small level interaction. Accepting that people start as comfort-seeking machines, do a lot of paired work, small group work, and build it up gradually to bigger interaction. That should be very obvious to you. You're already doing it, I hope, within your own programs, but it starts small and gets bigger. This all sits within the second step called the prime. How to break the ice. Now, I haven't actually told you what to do in that first step. That second step called prime. And you're still going, yep, that sounds like icebreakers to me. Again, this is a very long webinar if I just focused on this piece here, but I'm going to give the fast food version. At an absolute minimum, I believe there are at least 5 critical elements that should be reflected in every experience you present that aims to break the ice. Hopefully I don't need to describe what that means to anyone, but it's about those inhibitions that people come with when they're feeling awkward at the beginning of a program. Even if it's just with you or the venue and they're familiar with each other, there'll still be inhibitions even in that space. These are the 5 things that I have found that make a massive difference to those experiences that I'm looking to break the ice. The first one is that it has to be fun. Now, in a moment, I'm going to give you the classic example and use this list as the litmus test. But it has to be fun. That should be so obvious, but not often do I see that. I can remember, must have been a couple of years ago, big auditorium, 300 people, keynote speaker got up there, but before they arrived, they had someone warm up the audience. Apart from them introducing themselves, the very first thing they said was, turn to someone next to you, introduce yourself, and share your most embarrassing moment. What? Are you on crack? That makes no sense at all. They would have regarded that as their icebreaker, I guarantee it. But there was nothing fun about that. Apart from which, of course, moves to the next step. It's very threatening. We all know that public speaking is one of the biggest issues we have for people. And so they're frightened of that. Asking someone to stand up in front of others can be very threatening. It's got to be highly interactive. That's where the sharing occurs. Simple, it don't take too long to describe something if you're looking to engage that group. And finally, success-oriented. Even if it's a competition, if the orientation or the emphasis is on the interaction, the energy, the laughter, it's going to work. And here's the classic. How often have you been in a room where you all had to stand up in a U-shaped tables and give your name, explain who you are, where you're from, and how bored you are? And yet again, they'll often describe that as their icebreaker. In my experience, that's just a poor excuse of not knowing what else to do. There are so many other options. Now, I'm not saying never use that as a technique. I'm just saying don't confuse that with an icebreaker. And so it's not fun. It definitely threatens people because you've been asking people to stand in front of others to talk. It's not very interactive because I guarantee you, while you're thinking about something else, someone else is talking. So you're too busy thinking about what you're going to say. It is simple. The task of standing up and talking could be simple, but the process by which you achieve it is very complex. And it's never successful because it fills a few minutes, but I guarantee most people won't have remembered anyone else's names. It's just something that we feel like we have to do. So if you're wondering, how do we do that? They are the things. So look back at your own experiences in your own programs that you might regard as the icebreaker. But here's my second challenge of the day. How much of those experiences tick most, if not all, of these ingredients? Fun, non-threatening, interactive, simple, and success-oriented. Now, in the next couple of minutes, I want to wrap up these last few steps and we'll then move to Q&As because I'm hoping by now I've stimulated some questions that you've perhaps been noting. So we've got to the second step. This is all within the comfort zone. At some point, you've given a whiffum what I call a WIFM, what's in it for me, a reason to step outside their comfort zone. And this is where your leadership really has to pump, is that your content is king, whatever you're doing, whether it's a maths teacher, PE teacher, camp leader, a camp, a rock climbing wall, whatever it is that you're doing, your content now needs to be delivered. But your approach can create and maintain a powerful and rewarding environment which your group can function and grow. That's your role. And it can happen at the same time that you're delivering the content. You're familiar with that. That's why it's important to understand things like choice and valuing people fully and others, having a goal of some sort to give a reason for people to be there. And importantly, as experiential educators, the ability to reflect. Now, there could have been opportunities to reflect up to this point in your program, but because you haven't really pushed people outside their comfort zone, it won't have been so obvious. Now it is. The majority of your program is going to be in the pumping stage. And this is where you have the opportunity to actually support your group, invite them to reflect from time to time. All the things, all of you right now are doing very, very well from a point of practicing the art of experiential education. It needs to involve reflection. Now, I don't know every program in the world. Absolutely, I'm certainly not an expert in any of that stuff, but I do know if I wanted to adopt a model, and this comes again directly from the Partnership for 21st Century Learning, are the 4 C's. I know there's a 7C model, there's all sorts of other models out there. I like this one because it's 4, easy to remember. The collaboration, communication, critical thinking, and creativity. They are often some of the possibilities that I can then focus my group on developing those skills in addition to the content that I'm wanting to create. So if I'm building team values, I want to look at these particularly. But if I'm a maths teacher, I can still look at the value of collaborating or having critical thinking applied in the exercises that I'm introducing as a maths teacher, and so on and so on. So step 3 is the pump. That's your content. That's where most of this stuff's going to happen. As I said, this is not really a step so much as it is a result at the end. It's the most powerful and rewarding outcome possible for your group. The argument behind this model, that I call the difference model, is that you took the time to prepare your group, inviting them to interact, developing those relationships, which then formed a very solid bedrock for trust, so that you can then help grow all of these other abilities for the group. So it's not just the content you're delivering, but you're also making a difference to how they feel as a group and naturally as an individual as well. Graphically, if you need to see it, it could look a little bit like this. The bedrock is that plan, articulating exactly what is the difference you want to make in your program. A small amount of time, and people often say, well, how long should I last? Really? Your group will address this. If they feel that they're able to step outside their comfort zone and it's suitable and appropriate, sure, move them into pump. But I also know some groups where it took me much, much longer than I anticipated to actually get them primed before I can move them into the pump stage. But generally speaking, pump is where the majority of your time is. And then, of course, you reach the peak of your mountain. So we've got probably just under 10 minutes now for questions at this point. I have, like a locomotive, gone, shared not only the understanding of where these thoughts have come from in terms of those universal truths, but I've also shared those 4 steps that when I stand in front of a group, helps me answer the question, what is possible for them? That when I follow those steps, which, when I now feed this back to those experts and people like Carl Ronke, go, wow, yeah, that sounds like something I was doing, even though they didn't have the words for it back then because they called it intuition. I've just shared my intuition. I've just explored that process. So Dan, over to you. I'm not sure what happens now, but let's open up for some questions.
Sure, and I'd like to remind everybody to go ahead and use the Q&A button on your top left-hand corner to submit your questions. Take advantage of this moment. And while folks are typing that in, I have a question for you, if you don't mind, Mark.
Please.
Looking at your book, you touch on something that I hardly ever hear people talk about, which is when to stop a program. I'd love if you could spend a few minutes with that.
Yeah, that's really interesting because I just recorded a video tutorial for that this week in my front garden with a friend. I shot up a whole lot of 10 video tutorials all at once, and this was one of the questions that came up. I'm not saying I should tell you when to stop your program. The question is really about at what point do I feel I need to move the experience into the next one? And my general experience says just as I'm reaching the peak. That is the level of momentum and energy or excitement or inspiration, whatever word you want to give it, whatever you're hoping to produce. When you're just about to get to the peak, it's the crest of the wave, start to move forward, because that has the best programmatic reasons for moving on. A, they're engaged. B, you've got their attention. And look, if you get complaints that they say, hey, can we just keep doing this? Can we do it again? Better to have those complaints than having no complaints on account of the fact that everyone was bored and left the scene. So for me, that's critical, just as you reach the peak. And then one of my little tricks is that I'll invite the group to reflect back on what we've just done. And I'll often look for some witticism or some humorous moment that occurred in that space, almost like a reflection. Go, oh, okay, I know I said this, but did you notice when this happened? People have a little bit of a chuckle. We start to sort of cool down a little bit. I then move them onto the next experience. So that's when I stop an activity, Dan. Oh, we've got some good questions here. Do you have any foolproof icebreakers examples to share with us, and what is the name of the activity? The quickest way to answer that is, and I can give you all the names and you can find all the instructions for this, but if you go to planeo.com, there is a ton of free content on there, dozens of activities which fit this answer, Titus. There's a couple that I can think of right now off the top of my mind. An activity called 1, 2, 3. It's actually alphabetized, not just the numbers, but 1, 2, 3. A quick partner activity, but eventually builds up into a large group exercise. Another one I know called, it's actually called the Icebreaker Question Exchange. You'll be familiar with this, but asking a series of questions, or in pairs, they each have a question each. They ask each other the question and then they swap over. Another game called Crosstown Connections. This would be one that would be familiar to people who perhaps have come across the work of Nate Follin. It appears in his latest book called The 100th Monkey. So there's some quick ones, but go to planeo.com, search for activities and click free. There's no opt-in. I'll never know that you were there. And there are dozens and dozens of activities that would fit that. And if you can't find something out of 3 or 4 dozen activities, use the search filter and then say, okay, I'm working with 30 people. I want them to get to know each other. I've only got 10 minutes, bang. And it'll filter it down and help you find something that you're looking for. So hopefully that answers your question there, Titus. Andrea asks, yes, that was my question about transitions. How best to transition people from one topic or activity to another? So Andrea, to repeat, I was using a little reflection on what we just did. So last night, here's a classic example. We introduced a tag game. And apparently, someone understood that when I said you could only pivot that on one foot to be able to move and grab another ball that was, say, around you, they saw it as jumping, running some other place. Now, most people would never have noticed it, but I did. And when I introduced it to the rest of the group, they all thought that was hilarious. And then out of that, I would say, okay, great. So we're now going to take that understanding and then move it into the next activity. So I'm often looking for a segue, something that happened in my last activity that I can highlight in my next one. And again, last night, and it's not surprising, they said, wow, where did that time go? Why did they say that? Apart from it just being fun, 90 minutes went really quickly because of those connections I was providing. And so that was really important. So that's a couple of things. Again, on Planeo's database, inside the leadership tips, I often talk about things like that, Andrea, where I go, hey, this is a great activity to do before something else, or here are some things I often mention before doing that. So there's lots of framing ideas. So every activity comes with at least one, if not several, ideas for how you frame the experience. That'll give you lots of ideas. Eric, long question, so let me just read this out as I'm also learning it. I'm a cognitive behavioral therapist and always think of changing thoughts or behavior in order to change people's feelings. I guess I want to clarify what you mean by changing how people feel. Do you mean that the goal is to provide an experience that creates an atmosphere of trust, connection, learning, and growth, and then people are more willing to change behavior? Quick answer, Eric, yes, absolutely, you nailed it. It is absolutely that. That platform is so critical that you understand as a behavioralist that it's the feelings that stops people from wanting to participate. It's the things that if there's no trust, people pull back from participating fully, or if there's no fun, people find it difficult to engage. And if there's no challenge, only boredom and there's no opportunity for growth. So I'm using this technology to build an atmosphere. I'm going to call it fun. Scientifically, it's referred to as flow. It's those moments where voluntarily you want to be a part of it and you desire for it to keep on going, and you're not even really aware of what's going on around you, which is why time passes so quickly. So the quick answer is, Eric, yes, it is about creating that platform, that atmosphere of trust and connection, and then they're more willing to change their behaviours. So there was 3 people who last night set off to the side. They were the managers. Thought, oh no, they even described it to me. I just want to see how my group operates. I'm going, dude, you really want to have to be part of the group because this is too much fun to stand away from. And then after about 3 or 4 minutes, it was clear that they wanted to come in. And then I just, hey, come on in. And that gave them permission to then join. Something happened in those first few minutes that changed their feeling, that then, of course, then when I offered them the opportunity to come and play, they did, which was really good. Got a couple more questions. Do you ever intentionally set a group up to fail? Why or why not? Great question, Dan. Yes, absolutely. Now, in shorter programs, no, because I don't believe I have enough time to correct the situation if they don't get it right. Because as all of you would be aware, a big part of the paradigm of experiential learning is adventure-based learning, and that is unanticipated outcomes. So if I only have a short amount of time, I don't often do that. But with longer programs, yes, because that is where I'm effectively asking people to step into their stretch zone a bit further than would ordinarily be possible. And something needs to happen in that space because that it prepares them, it changes their feelings, that will then influence how they act and behave later on. It's not something I go to a great deal. I would rather prepare a group to succeed. But sometimes, and I can think of a few corporate groups I've had to work with that were denying their growth because of a certain set of feelings and opinions that they had. I needed to set them up for failure in order to actually open that up to discuss and give permission to talk about. As part of this being hosted with AEE, Plamio wanted to offer you, and thank you if you've got to this far into the webinar and are still engaged, that if you were interested in getting access to all the premium material, so as I said, there was no compulsion here, there was tons of free stuff. We are committed to providing 1 out of every 7 activities being completely free. I think there's over 310 activities on there at the moment, got about 30 or 40 sitting in the wings about to be uploaded. But if you find that there's something in there that's of value to you, use that coupon on any of the annual subscriptions and it'll give you 30% off. And so it works out only a few dollars per person if you're looking at some of the multi-user subscriptions, but that could be a useful, and that exists forever. So whether it's now, you could pass it on to a friend or to your boss, that's not a limited time, that'll be there forever. AEE webinar is the coupon code. You click in at the very top of your checkout page and you will get a 30% discount. And here are the other ways in which you can contact me, folks. I really appreciate it if you'd like to extend the opportunity to, I'm extending the opportunity for you to write to me, email, clearly, a little difficult for me just to turn up or be at the end of a phone, but hello@plamio.com, best way, or otherwise through Twitter @Plamio. There's a couple of my books. No Props is the biggest selling activity publication in Australia. I don't know where it is in terms of the rest of the world, but that's the one that I'm in the middle of rewriting. And going to engage a lot of this content that I've shared in this webinar into that new version, which initially will be produced in China. And then if you go to seriousfunbook.com, you can download a free copy of the audiobook. The first 50 pages are completely free. And if you like what you hear in that, you might choose for a couple of bucks to download the whole thing, either from Amazon or from the website itself. So I don't have any further questions, Dan, so perhaps I'll throw back to you.
Sure. And first of all, let me just thank you so much, Mark, for being here, waking up extra early and showing up from halfway across the world from where I am. Really appreciate how you take what someone like myself might say is, yeah, it's just intuition. I just have to feel it out and know what to do, and say, no, there's actually, there's a way to kind of structure that. There's a formula you can use, and that makes that intuition more accessible to anybody, no matter where they're experience level. And thanks everybody for being here. Thank you very much once again, Mark.
Thanks, Dan. Thank you, everybody. All the best.